I've been debating on sharing this for a few weeks now, and I figured why not, right? I mean, spooky season is practically here already. So, this happened back in October of 2013, during my senior year of high school. My sister, who could really be called a medium, and I had been browsing the web for urban legends when we stumbled upon an article about a game known as the Game of 100 Candles. In short, this game was a sort of ritual, very similar to the way Bloody Mary is supposed to work. So, to put a long story short, the people playing this game are to light 100 candles and tell a ghost story and then blow out one of the candles. At the end of the game, you should have conjured 100 separate spirits. And, like every ritual game, it warned you to play at your own risk. But, no big deal, right? None of these things are real. So, we found a night where our mum wouldn't be home until after 2 a.m. and planned for our game. My sister, her best friend T, and another friend N, and myself prepared for our night. We waited until our mum left and for the sun to begin to set, and then we proceeded to set up our kitchen. We set up 100 tea candles on the counter and found a box of matches, and as the sun sank lower, we shut off the lights in our house and opened up our glass door, so the smoke from the candles wasn't too bad, and turned off our cell phones. And around 7:30, once it was perfectly dark, we started the game by lighting the candles. At first, we just told light-hearted stories, like I saw a ghost and it went boo kind of thing. As we finished the first 10 candles, there was a palpable change in the atmosphere around us though. The air had a static feel to it, and the hair on my neck and my arms began to stand on end. As mentioned, my sister qualifies as a medium who can see and feel things that are not apparent to the naked eye, and even she began to squirm in her chair. As we started the next set of candles, 11 to 20 this time, the house became painfully quiet, and the stories also began to grow darker. The stories that we told went from silly folklore to real-time accounts of just strange things that we had seen. As the candles were blown out, we began hearing creaking and cracking around us. Now, we did live in an older house, but the house never groaned or cracked. Well, at least not this loudly before. So, we finished the next set of 10, and everyone playing was visibly beginning to feel uncomfortable. I mean, the laughter had stopped, and a more somber tone had taken over. Again, we ignored the strange sounds and just continued to play. As the time passed and it grew closer to 8:45, the game took a sour turn though. The cracks and the creaks became louder and more frequent, and as the 25th candle was blown out, we heard the distinct sound of someone pulling into the driveway, shutting a car door and walking up the deck to enter through the glass doors. We waited, but the motion lights on our driveway just never lit up, and nobody ever came to the door, and then we heard footsteps leading back across the deck and out of earshot. One of our friends suggested that we pause to look outside and make sure our mum had not returned home early or something, and she hadn't. At this point, my sister suggested using a dowsing pendulum. Our friends agreed, and we laid out the rules of clockwise for yes and counterclockwise for no, and saying goodbye and whatnot. My sister then asked the room, "Is someone here with us?" And the pendulum began to rapidly swing in a clockwise direction. Our friend, Anne, asked, "Is there more than one of you here?" And the pendulum began to swing clockwise again. Anne said that this was some sort of bullshit and took the pendulum himself. I asked, "Did you come because we played the game?" Again, the pendulum swung clockwise. And finally, T provoked it by saying, "If you really are there, why don't you prove it?" And promptly, we heard a loud thud against the wall behind us. We decided that we were just freaking ourselves out though, and someone must have been fucking with us and had obviously managed to throw something in the dark to make the thudding noise. But curiosity got the better of us, and Anne suggested that we just keep playing, so we did. He told a story about seeing a spectre in his dreams once, then seeing it in real life. He put out the 26th candle and 2 others blew out. At this time, my sister, she became visibly frightened. The reason was unknown to us until later, but she claims that at this time, she saw a solid black mass moving down the hallway towards us. It felt like the house had become 10 degrees cooler after this candle was blown out too, and we all felt that. We sat in silence for a moment before Anne says, "If you're really here, I need a sign." And this is when shit just really hit the fan. We heard heavy, loud footsteps coming down the hallway and the doors creaking open. The flames of the candle started to waver with no wind, and Anne grabbed my hand and whispered that something was breathing behind him, even though I'm seated to his right and my sister and her friend are directly across from us and we couldn't see anything. Anne freezes up though, and then turns around suddenly with nothing behind him. And then, with nothing near it, the doors that we had left open slowly creak shut, with no wind present. Then, T says that someone is touching his arm, and then his neck, and then his face. At this time, we just decided to stop playing. I believe the exact phrase was, "Fuck this, I'm done, say goodbye." So, we did. We extinguished the rest of the candles and began turning on the lights and moving as a group. And although the candles were out and the game was over, there was still this really heavy feeling all around. We moved to our dining room, where we had heard the thud earlier, to turn the rest of the lights on. We entered the room as a group and turned on the lights, and Halloween decorations littered the ground like they'd been thrown from their original places. On top of our server was my mum's old battery-powered witch. Her motor had burned out years ago, and we never put batteries in anymore, and she was just simply sitting there. But we started hearing a cracking noise from the corner of the room. We slowly turned around to see that the witch was rocking and bringing her wrinkled hands together, slowly getting faster and faster until the witch just fell over. As her body hit the ground, we heard the loud bang of a door or cabinet slamming shut somewhere else in the house too. And suddenly, our friend T screamed that his face was burning. We turned around and he had a small scratch on his face and a trickle of blood was running down his cheek. And that was it. We grabbed phones and keys and just ran out of the house, dropped our friends off and didn't return home until much, much later. When we did eventually return home though, another friend came over to stay up with us until our mum got home. We turned on cartoons and cranked the volume and just tried to ignore the banging and the footsteps and the heavy breathing that wandered through our house for the rest of the night. In the years following our night of playing 100 candles, we've seen quite a bit of activity in our home. I've shared this in other places, but I sincerely believe that this was a catalyst for the activity in our home. I have since moved, but my sister, she remains in our home and still frequently experiences phenomena, including seeing the shadowy figure occasionally. Hindsight is 20/20, and we really should have listened to the warnings, I know, but we were young and curious. Many years ago, I worked on an ambulance first responding to 911 calls and all that. One day, we were dispatched to a person not acting right type of call. When my partner and I arrived at the apartment complex, the first thing we noted was that all the people, except for the patient that were living in the same unit, they were standing outside with terrified looks on their faces, shaking violently. It was raining and it was nighttime outside, but I quickly approached them and asked what was going on. The 25-year-old male looked at me and said, "Yeah, so we were just playing a game when suddenly my girlfriend just started shrieking and screaming. All the lights went out, including the candles, and then we saw her lay on her stomach on top of the board game. My girlfriend's head, hands and legs, they all went into the air, and then suddenly she just fell to the floor, stood up and ran into the back of the apartment." My partner and I then cautiously walked up the steps to the apartment door with the mag lights. The door was already cracked open, so I politely knocked and introduced myself as a 911 ambulance paramedic before walking inside the apartment unit. The light switch didn't work, but I could hear a creaking wooden noise in the background, just squeaking back and forth. All the walls were painted dark colours like black and maroon, and it was obvious that these people liked heavy metal, skulls, and dark paintings because they were represented all over the walls. I started walking through the apartment calling out for the patient, looking for any sign of her. As I walked deeper and deeper into the unit, it just started getting colder and colder. Finally, I saw her in a rocking chair. She was slowly rocking back and forth and just looking straight forward. I introduced myself to her and asked her what's going on. There was no answer from her, and she just kept rocking back and forth. I got up close to her looking for any medical abnormalities, and her eyes were so dark. Either her pupils were that big or her eye color was just that dark. But all of her other vital signs were pretty normal. Her blood sugar was normal. She didn't appear to be having any seizure activity or anything. I tried to get a painful stimulus out of her by squeezing the shoulder or a sternal rub, but she wouldn't even flinch. I couldn't find any track marks on her too for drug use or anything, and throughout all of this, she just kept rocking back and forth, just looking straight forward. The rule of thumb for paramedics now for this situation, and not being alert to person, place, time or event, is that she needs to go to the hospital. I tell her that since she's not talking with me, I'll be moving her to a stretcher. And suddenly, the rocking just stops. I mean, all sound everywhere just stops. I can only hear breathing noises now. Well, I lift under her armpits and my partner lifts under her legs, and as we lift, we notice something really strange. The patient stays in a seated form, like completely rigid. We lay her on the stretcher and wheel her to the inside of the ambulance, and as we load her into the back, cracking noises like breaking tree branches filled the air. I look over at her and notice now that she's looking right at me with a huge, scary, crazed smile on her face. And no matter where I moved, her head and eyes just tracked me with that same unwavering smile too. My partner looks over at me sympathetic, knowing that I'll have to be in the back with her. I playfully say, "Good, now maybe you'll talk to me." We begin riding to the hospital, and the heat was on full blast in the back of the ambulance, but no matter how hard we pumped it, it just wouldn't heat up. She was still smiling that big toothy smile and staring at me too, and not answering any of my questions. I looked down to grab my pen that fell on the floor and then looked back up, and out of nowhere, the highest pitched screams and shrieks filled the air as she started lunging at me and grabbing at me. She clashed her teeth and bit at me in my direction, trying all that she could to break loose. Luckily, the stretcher seatbelts were secured to her, making me just out of reach. The huge crazed smile broke into a frightening look of terror and then anger, and my back was against the wall of the box. Luckily, we were already at the hospital, unintentionally a Catholic one, mind you, and as the ambulance drove in, the patient stopped all she was doing. She calmly looked straight back forward and just went mute again. We brought her into the ER and talked with the doctor about what had happened, who, needless to say, was pretty astonished by the story. So, a bit of backstory first. I've been best friends with this girl since high school, I think, for probably close to 15 years now, in fact. I used to practically spend more time at her house than my own. Her parents are great people, and they treated me like another daughter because my parents are pretty awful themselves. However, my best friend started dating a guy about a year and a half ago, and since they got serious, we haven't hung out much at all. She has since bought a house and moved in with him too, and I spend a lot more time at their house now, but it's been nearly 2 years since I've spent any time in her parents' home aside from going over there for the holidays and whatnot. At some point though, within the past year or so, her mum got really into estate sales. She would go and buy antiques and then either fill her house up with them or try to resell them on eBay. I don't know if this is related to the experiences that I've been having, but I find it hard to believe that these strange occurrences have nothing to do with all the objects belonging to the dead people that they now have in their house. Anyway, my best friend's parents contacted me about pet sitting for them while they went on vacation for a week. I was glad to do it because I owe them a lot, and honestly, I love their 3 dogs. I've known them since they were puppies, and they had the 3 dogs shut in the tiled kitchen or dining sunroom area using a baby gate. That way, if there were any accidents, it was easy to clean since there was no carpet. Plus, the oldest dog, a bulldog, overheats easily, so he likes to be sprawled out on the tiles. The bowls of dog food and water were left out for them, and I was supposed to head over there for 2 or 3 times a day to just spend maybe an hour there. No big deal. So, the first day I showed up to let the dogs outside, I do all my other duties. The gate between the kitchen and the rest of the house had been knocked down, though. It was honestly not really something that I had thought twice about. The dogs probably knocked it over themselves being bored or something. But 2 of the dogs were still in the kitchen, though. The gate had fallen in a way that prevented them from easily getting out. The bulldog was missing, though, which was a little weird because he couldn't easily get over the gate either, but I figured he probably kicked it over behind him and wandered off to nap somewhere or something. But because of his age, he is definitely the least likely to make a mess or cause trouble, so I wasn't too worried. But I realized that meant that I had to check the rest of the house for any accidents just to be safe. But first, I get the other 2 outside. I was going to list the things that I have to do, feed the fish, refill the food and the water bowls, etc., when I get this kind of weird feeling. The bulldog is mostly blind, but he normally would have come wiggling to greet me, and all the noise I'd been making with the food would definitely have brought him over. So I started calling the dog and looking for him. I immediately heard him barking, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked at all of his favorite spots, but there was nothing. At this point, I was in full panic mode, mostly because I could hear the dog but just couldn't see him, so I felt like I was losing my mind or something. Finally, out of desperation, I started throwing open doors upstairs, and I find him scared out of his wits shut in the guest bedroom. This made me feel really uneasy. My best friend's parents had been renovating the upstairs of their house, so the carpets were torn up and all the furniture was moved into storage. But they had shut all the doors before leaving to keep all the cats out of them because all of the tools and the stuff laying around them could have hurt them. So, how the hell did one of the dogs get one of the doors open and then manage to get shut inside too? I mean, the gate coming down, I'd been totally willing to write off as accidental, but finding the dog shut inside of a bedroom that I'd known had been closed off just made me feel really scared. So, I called my friend and told her what had happened, mostly to keep myself occupied while I'm still at the house. She told me that her parents had actually bought a really nice dog gate before they left, but had forgotten to unpack it, and that I could open it and set it up if I thought that would help. So, I found the giant box by the front door, emptied it, and got to work. It took the better part of an hour to set up, but it was this really good quality pressure-locked gate. It was made of metal, it came up to chest height, so probably around 4 feet tall, I'd say, and takes 2 hands to open. Let me tell you, there was just no way that a dog could knock this down accidentally. Like I said, 2 hands are required to open it too. There are like 2 parts to the locking mechanism. You have to sort of hold this button down with one hand in order to slide the lock off with the other hand. So, content with a job well done, I left that night and went home to my own dogs. The next morning, I came back to find no issue. The gate had worked. But when I headed there after work that night, my heart dropped to my stomach. Somehow, the gate had been opened. Not knocked down as if the dogs had done it, but opened. And the rest of the gate was still in place between the door frame. I refused to believe that the dogs had somehow opened it. Again, the bulldog was missing too. And again, I found him shut in the same room upstairs. Day 3, I go back expecting more of the same stuff, and I'm practically prepared for it this time. But it just gets so much worse. So, the kitchen and the dining room and the sunroom and the living room are all arranged in a sort of circle. From the living room, you head into the kitchen, and from the kitchen, you move into the dining room or the sunroom, and then from there, you can head through a door into the living room. However, the door between the living room and the sunroom is always locked. Not just closed, but actually locked. And to keep anyone from getting any funny ideas, they actually have a chair directly in front of the door, blocking it from opening. The reason they do this is because the way that the door swings open, if someone were to open it, the door would hit their expensive sound equipment for their TV. This door is not used regularly and has not been used since I met her. In fact, they had recently put a treadmill in the sunroom that totally blocks the door from being used. What I'm trying to say is that that's how infrequently this door is used. Anyway, I walk into the house that night and was greeted by the dogs. Okay, I guess the gate is opened again. Awesome. Except this time, the gate was opened, and so was the door to the living room. The armchair that blocks the door had been pushed out of the way too, and the door itself was unlocked. The key is left in the lock usually, and the door was just flung wide open. Now, while I do believe in the paranormal, I am naturally a pretty massive skeptic. I really don't believe any of the stories that I read online or any of the things that I see on TV. But at this point, I am terrified of my friend's parents' house. I know it hasn't been anything really bad, but I just don't want to be alone when that weird stuff is going on. Even if the door was somehow just accidentally unlocked, unlikely mind you, but since I didn't personally check, who knows? I can't think of a rational explanation for how that chair moved. And I also don't have an explanation for the dog being shut in the one room, especially the second time it happened, when I know that I personally double-checked the door and made sure that it was firmly shut. I love and respect the family a lot, but I don't know how to tell them that I can't pet sit for them anymore. I don't want to be in that house alone anymore. Anyway, I finished the pet sitting many days ago, and I went back a handful of times with either my sister or my best friend, never alone, mind you. And the times I went to check on the dogs with someone else, there was nothing weird. But I am currently in the talks with them about setting up a camera, so I'll keep you updated if there's anything further. This happened a few years ago when I was around 20 or so, I'd say. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt in my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, etc. He mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother, and she now apparently lives across the street from me, and he thought it would be a really good idea if we met because apparently we're very similar and I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life, so why not? So he rings her cell and tells her to come by my place. She arrived at my apartment and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, was very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, so 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason, and we played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided to go home, leaving us two alone, and we chilled for a while longer, ended up making out, and got all of her contact info before she told me that she was going home and that we should meet up soon. Over the next few weeks, we develop a strong relationship and we hang out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and just walk across the street and we'd get wasted and watch movies together. Quite honestly, it was just really awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, things got really weird though. The day that I returned, she asked if she could come over, so I unpacked all my stuff and then told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all of the awesome things I did and the people I met in New York City, and I could just immediately tell that she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she just said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a fuck." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily that I'd been getting to know was not like that. She was caring and passionate and just an amazing person. Or so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later, and I had just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift, and I collapsed in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 9 p.m, and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at that moment, because honestly, I'm just too exhausted, and our last hangout was just too weird for me to comprehend, so I'm still trying to decide how to deal with that. So I plug my phone into charge and turn off the lights and just fall asleep pretty effortlessly. But then, I wake up to somebody pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs, "Open the fucking door, let me in now." My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke, and I grab my phone from beside my bed, my heart beating a million miles per hour, 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily, and I scan through the text while she's still at the door screaming, trying to break down my door. The most recent text from her is a long one claiming that I'm a piece of shit for not responding to a text earlier, and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. She had a key to the building still, from when she used to live there. So I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack, and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door to calm her down? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door though, and she begins wailing on me, swinging her arms, trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette, and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was very obviously on some sort of drug though. She just kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text messages, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow able to calm her down, and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another, and she was quiet now, finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole and that I need to explain myself. And the look in her eyes was just pure evil as she spoke to me in this calm demeanor. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I take her home, and I return to my apartment to attempt sleeping again, at which I don't succeed this time. A couple of days later, I return home from work, and there's an envelope taped to my door. I open it, and it's a handwritten letter from Emily apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a candy bar attached to the envelope too, one that I'd never heard of that she always told me that I needed to try. I never spoke to her again after this, but from what Matt tells me, which by the way, he always knew that she was a problematic person, she's a heavy user of crack now and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. Needless to say, I did not try that candy bar. I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, we would get a new crop of interns too. Most of them were fine, but some caused issues, like when we caught 2 of them actually making out in the file room. But overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college just trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual though, right in the middle of the summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age in fact, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well, and although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly and we had some common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age too, so that was kind of nice. But the interns were all teenagers and the regular staff averaged around 60, older than my mum, so I was pretty psyched to have a peer to chat with. So occasionally, I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk in his cubicle and whatnot. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. I got zero bad vibes from the guy, if I'm being honest. But it wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally just acted unprofessionally. One day, he showed up for work at 3:15 p.m. when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to just go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone in my office too, but I didn't supervise him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. Now, if you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated to the campaign of our big boss. In other words, he wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of that summer, though, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked that I was leaving because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give him a sympathetic yeah, but he would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and it became disruptive to the people who sat near me, in fact. I found it slightly annoying, but I also was extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner, and I spent my last month there not caring much about my co-workers and what they thought, so I tolerated him lingering by my desk. One day, though, he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other co-workers would offer me rides home if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. And man, it smelled awful and was just full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized, and we got on our way. But once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said that he didn't need to ask me that insistently, and said that we could stop at a diner on the way. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation, and he was intelligent and had a variety of interests. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old co-workers. Quite honestly, I had a good time. I expressed too that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was getting late, but he kept insisting, so I just relented in the end. As I directed him toward my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was extremely difficult to make anyway, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding and laughing, and his whining faded out. We came up to the turn to get onto my street, and when I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I laughed in a "what the hell are you doing" kind of way, thinking that he was just joking around. When I began giving directions about how to turn around and get back, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I'm in a man's car, someone that I don't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context I know him. And now he's displaying really weird behavior outside of work as well. My instinct was to not insist I be let out of his car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something negative, and in hindsight, it may have been the right thing to do when I think about the type of person he turned out to be. So I told him that we could hang out at the park near my house if he wanted to talk sometime. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed, and beside the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine to talk to. Until he dumped his entire life story on me, including his prior arrest for theft, his heroin addiction, and related struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was very put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information all at once, and I was still on alert because of his prior behavior, mind you. I tried changing the subject by showing him pics of my dog. I scrolled one pic too far, and the next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely. Way differently than the slob I was at work. He grabbed the phone and went, "Wow, you're very photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything. There was a long silence, and then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we are and that we have similar interests, etc., and that he wishes I wasn't moving so that we could try hanging out again, but on a date this time. I didn't say anything, and he broke the silence with, "Sorry, I'm saying all of this stuff. I'm actually high right now. That's why I know where Riverside, a bad neighborhood that had previously come up in conversation, is, and I went there yesterday to buy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it, and I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out at this. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed that it was something he was recovering from, not currently using. I also realized that I had been in a car that he was operating while he was under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was pretty clueless, but I felt very, very stupid at this point. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him or hate him, and just kept saying over and over again how nice I am and how understanding I am, that I'm pretty and smart. All of these weird compliments interspersed with talking down about himself. I didn't know what to do, so I just smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry, but that I was tired and I needed to go home. And that's when he started crying. He had this really weird, wheezy sob too, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. But my patience was wearing thin at this point, and my anxiety was through the roof. It's a weird feeling to be annoyed and panicky at the same time, so I stood up and apologized, said the park was close to my house, so I'll walk, and started to leave when I remembered that I left all of my stuff in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned that I forgot my stuff in his car and joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying and stood up and ran over to his car to unlock it, and I grabbed my stuff out of the back seat. His demeanor changed drastically as he calmly apologized for making things weird and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes in the end, but made him drop me off a block over from my little side street so that he wouldn't see which house was mine. Now, I could end it there, but what bothered me the most about this guy happened after this encounter, and I'll try to make this part short. So, a week or two after that weird evening, at the end of August by this point, I had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me with long ramblings detailing his feelings about himself and about our missed opportunity, and I didn't respond to these messages. But now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate. The text stopped after a few weeks, and quite honestly, I just forgot about it. Fast forward to February, and I get a text from a former co-worker. Her message said, "Sorry you had to hear about it this way," and her text message was a link to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside Stabbing on Wednesday." Because of the way she worded it, I thought Warner was the victim, but when I read the article, it included his mugshot and the charges. Apparently, he was the attacker and he actually murdered someone. I felt so shocked and disgusted that I couldn't believe I knew someone who killed another human. Later on, I called an old co-worker for some details. Apparently, shortly after I left the job, he was fired for trashing the men's bathroom. Just threw around anything that he could lift and poured all the soap out and smeared it all over the place. He then apparently lost his apartment too. Presumably some of the articles about the stabbing describe Warner as a homeless man. I have to assume that that's how he ended up in the aforementioned Riverside. There are a lot of homeless drug addicts who squat in abandoned houses there. At the time, I wondered if the man he'd stabbed had refused to give him something that he wanted, and that is how he reacted to a hard no. I don't think I made all the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner, but man, I'm glad I was able to avoid setting him off like that, since he was clearly not stable at all. Hands down, that was the worst intern I ever encountered. So this was about 3 years ago on a dark stretch of road near a main intersection in a major Bay Area city. I worked at a big-name, healthy grocery store from 2014 to 2017. I was lucky to meet and work with amazing co-workers, some of whom have become my best and closest friends, in fact. One of my best friends, at the time and to this day, Cav, is one of the nicest, most caring people that I've ever met. He's incredibly generous, genuine and warm and welcoming to just about everyone, sometimes to a fault, in fact. At the time of this story, I'm a woman in my early 20s and Cav is a guy in his late 20s. Cav and I had a weekly ritual of driving around the city after work and just talking, sometimes about our problems, sometimes about what was going well, but it was therapeutic and always something to look forward to. This particular night, we invited our buddy Ben to join us. His department always got out 30 to 45 minutes after the rest of the store, so Cav and I decided that we should do a short drive around the area to just pass the time until Ben was off. Cav was driving that night too. So we did our drive and I headed back to the store to pick up Ben. In order to get back to the store too, we need to make a U-turn at a four-way intersection. To get to the intersection, we have to go down a dark but short stretch of road. There are no streetlights for some reason. I don't know why. The intersection is well lit though and is always busy, and has a shopping centre and plazas on each side. From the dark section of the road, it's exactly 302 feet, according to Google Maps, to the main, well-lit and ever-busy intersection. So, as we're driving down the dark section, Cav suddenly interrupts what I was saying and says, "Oh shit, did you see that person waving?" He slows down the car as I look back. "No, what are you talking about?" I say. He says, "You didn't see them?" There was someone in a black hoodie waving us down. I'm looking back and I have poor eyesight. It's dark, so no, I don't see anyone. There's no one there. As I'm saying this though, Cav is pulling into the empty parking lot parallel to the dark stretch of road. He reaches to the back seat and is moving jackets and other stuff off the seat, obviously making room for this person. I said to Cav, no one is getting in this car, do you understand? But he then says, if they need someone. But I interrupt and say, no, there's no one there, and even if there was, they could walk up to the fucking intersection, so no. He eventually agrees, but insists that we continue to circle around and check. I reluctantly agree, but realize that I have no choice anyway. So we circle back, and sure enough, there is a girl, my age, in her early 20s, just standing alone wearing all black. She has a hoodie on. She looks disheveled and is sort of crying, maybe. The cab rolls down the passenger window, my window, about halfway, to which I roll it back up another quarter of the way and asks her if she's okay. She seems off to me, and I immediately have these awful vibes from her. She says with her hands over her face that 4 guys stole my purse. It had my wallet, and I literally lost everything, and I don't have a phone. The weirdest thing about this is that she wasn't actually crying. She was stretching her words out and kind of whining, but she wasn't crying. I said, okay, well, we'll call the police for you. Why don't you walk up to the well-lit plaza at the main intersection and we'll wait with you for the police? She adamantly says, no, it won't help. I already called the police an hour ago. And this is when I started to freak out. She just said that she didn't have a phone and that she's standing in the dark for an hour. I said to her, I thought you don't have a phone. And she said, I do, but it's just dead. All of this was happening rapid fire, and before I can really mentally get into what is going on, Cav tells her to get into the car so that we can help her. I say, walk up to the plaza to the intersection and we'll help you. But Cav unlocks the door and says, no, don't worry, we'll drive you there. The girl has her hands in her front pocket of her hoodie and gets into the car. And at this point, I am pissed. Absolutely fuming, in fact. The girl is acting super weird, and I remember at this point that I have my box cutter on me. I reach down into my backpack and am rummaging through my crap to find it. Cav is talking to her, but everything she says is contradictory. She says that she isn't from this area, has no idea where she is, yet she tells us that she grew up and lives about 6 blocks away. As we're driving, she says that she wants to go to a particular bar that she could actually use a drink. I said to her, I thought you don't have your wallet or ID. I keep looking for my box cutter and am looking back at her. She has a waxy complexion and looks into my eyes as if she's looking through me. And it gives me the fucking creeps. Cav is incredibly kind to her, idiot, and keeps saying positive things, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. While this is happening, I find my box cutter, open it all the way and hold it in my lap. I turn back and keep my eyes on her. She tells us that she actually has a boyfriend nearby eventually and asks for us to take her there. She and Cav continue to talk, and she says that she was kicked out of her parents' house. Her hands still remain in her pocket, and mine remains holding the box cutter all this time. Because of this whole ordeal, we've totally forgotten about Ben at this point. Still watching her, I pull my phone out and call him. I'm explaining to Ben what's happening, and in a matter of seconds, she went from asking us for money and alcohol and just saying weird shit to just wanting to get out of the car. We didn't stop her at her boyfriend's house, but a few streets away, apparently in a random neighborhood. We drop her off, and there's silence for a few seconds in the car. And then Cav says, oh shit, she could have robbed us or killed us. Yeah, thanks, you fucking idiot. Anyway, I'm 100% certain that, at the very least, she was planning to rob us. Looking back on this, there's so much that I would have done differently, like calling the cops right away. We were lucky that nothing happened, but I'm positive that there was evil in that car that night. Context. I grew up in the middle of a farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there has always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There's a highway that sees about maybe 3 cars on it during the night. Directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I've always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found, but it was always a bit of fun. Maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles of miscellaneous items. There was no electricity or any sort of utility that made it homely, though. So, the years go by and the existence of the shack becomes just a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed a light going off and on outside of my window. After initially getting a little bit startled, I just dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes and it's nearing midnight and the light stays on. This time, I know for sure that it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but being my pansy 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. Too bad for me that no one wants to go out and check it out, so I end up going alone. I grab my pocket knife and flashlight. It was the best that I can think of with my shaken thoughts, and I take off into the night. As I near the highway, the lights turn off, almost making me choke on air, but I had to figure out what the hell was going on in there. I eventually make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. And what happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there's an old tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it because I knew I'd seen it rock ever so slightly, and as I did that, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing, and all I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could even process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying that he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I made it back to my door, but as I'm about to make it into safety, I decide to look back, and he was standing on the road, completely still, and no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then, and the shack still stands. The recliner remains in place, and my dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread that I had when I realized that the recliner was facing a window which was directed straight at my house. So this happened while I was still living in St. Louis, and I've since moved to Chicago. 2016 was a wild year for me, full of coming out of my shell and self-discovery. I found myself becoming more comfortable with using applications such as Grindr and Scruff to meet men online because I had social anxiety and had trouble meeting them elsewhere. But one night, I got a message from a seemingly average dude. He was very nice, super funny, was able to hold a conversation, and he was also not that bad looking, so I was intrigued and kept the conversation going. There were virtually no red flags about him, and I ended up exchanging numbers with him too. We get to texting, and after a week or so of solid conversation, we decide to meet up at a local cafe. I put on my best damn shirt, clean underwear, and I hit the road, and I'm excited. I was busy during the day, so we planned to meet at a local cafe around 8 p.m. He doesn't live in the city like I do, so he was unfamiliar with the area. When we met, I was immediately enamored with this guy too. He was cute, he made me laugh, and, surprise, he was who his photographs actually said he was. Nothing was strange about this guy, and he was just a cutie pie. And I was digging him, and by the feel of things, he was digging me too. What a twist, right? Anyway, at one point during the night, we were sharing memes with each other over the table. I show him one of the funniest that I have in my photos, and he nonchalantly grabs my phone from me to take a closer look. He started swiping on my phone for a minute, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it because I just assumed he was looking at the other memes I have saved. And no big deal. He gave me back my phone and then proceeded to show me some memes on his phone this time. A man who has a folder of saved memes on his phone is a true godsend, let me tell you. Anyway, the night goes on and the cafe is closing, so we decided to leave. As we're walking out together, he asks if I wanted to still hang out. I didn't feel comfortable letting him know where I lived just yet, so we just drove around the city listening to music and talking and whatnot. Just stuff like that. It was again just pretty normal, and we were just laughing and joking around, but at one point in the night, he turns to me at a red light and asks, "Do your roommates know you're on a date right now?" I laughed at this and just said, "No, why? Are you going to kill me?" I've honestly just read way too many things online, and that was my immediate reaction. He lightly just said, "I would use them as an emergency backup if I were you. You're probably right." I shot back, and we just continued with the night. It was nearing midnight, and I had a lot of laundry to do the next day, so I mentioned that we should probably just head home soon. He offered to drop me off at my house, but I didn't want him to know where I lived just yet, like I said, so I asked if he could just drop me off at the train instead, and he politely agreed. When I got home that night, I was totally thrilled with how things turned out. He was a total sweetheart, and I was really into him. So I opened up our conversation to shoot him a text message when I noticed at the bottom of our conversation was a notification that said, "You started sharing your location today at this time." I thought it was a little odd since I never used that feature, but I thought maybe I did it by accident or something and just turned it off. I sent him a follow-up text message saying that I had a really great time and would love to meet up with him again. But he didn't respond to this. I just assumed that he was busy and started browsing Reddit like the senseless fuck I am. I woke up the next morning and prepared to do my chores, washing my bed sheets, buying groceries, going to therapy. The grocery store was my last stop, and as I was ringing up all of my necessities, guess who was also in the self-checkout? It was the guy. Wow, imagine that. He immediately comes over and strikes up a conversation with me, and I thought it was odd as he previously mentioned that he doesn't live in the city and isn't very familiar with it, but the conversation was harmless, so I just kind of let it slide. A few weeks go by and, unfortunately, the conversations begin to dwindle and we start talking less and less. But quite honestly, I'm used to this happening, I guess, so I just let it happen without pushing for answers. And eventually, we just stopped talking altogether. One night, I'm home alone just sitting down watching cartoons when there's a knock at the door. It was late, so I didn't feel comfortable answering, so I just sat there for a moment hoping that they'd just go away. They knocked again, and more urgently this time. I peeked through the peephole and I made out 2 figures, and my heart immediately dropped as I recognized one of them in a hoodie or hat combo. He had an extremely defined jaw, so I was able to immediately recognize him. Well, I literally freaked the hell out and called one of my roommates to come home and that it was urgent. But when Andrew came home, he told me that he didn't see anybody near the apartment complex, so I calmed down a bit and explained the situation. It was also during this calming down period that I realized that he found out where I lived by my location sharing that he turned on while we were at the cafe. I didn't immediately turn it off when I got home, so he had plenty of time to figure out my coordinates, especially if he was watching the map immediately after he dropped me off at the train station. He never did show up again after this particular occurrence, and I never heard from him again either. I also noticed that our conversations disappeared from Grindr when I last checked, so I assumed that he must have blocked me. I still have no idea what he was planning to do, but I assumed that he was just going to rob me. But it's completely possible that it could have been something worse. So, this all happened when I was in 8th grade. I lived down the street from my friends Dylan and Emon, and we used to hang out every single day after school, and after a while, we got into Ouija boards and such. We didn't have a real one, but we printed one offline and made a makeshift one using a hoop earring. We would play with it daily for about 2 months too, or longer even, in Dylan's basement in the laundry room. To clarify, Dylan's basement and laundry room, it had no windows. Dylan was a musical kid and he had a xylophone in his basement down there to play. I remember he actually told me how to play Here Comes the Sun on it too. So, this particular day, we went into the basement and I played that tune on the xylophone because I thought I was hot shit doing so. I then laid the mallets down flat across the xylophone and we proceeded into the laundry room to play with the Ouija board. Backtracking a little bit though, we had played with it for a couple of months regularly at this point, like I mentioned. We had also become acquainted with some sort of spirit by this point as well. He hated talking about how he died and, in fact, just wouldn't do it, and was apparently enamored with me. But the earring moved so quickly and on its own too, a lot, so I was already pretty convinced, but of course, I wanted more. So, this one day, the last time the guys would play with it, I had asked the spirit for a sign. Yes, I know that that's dangerous and kind of against the rules, but the spirit agrees and I asked what we needed to pay attention to, and it told me the door. Hanging on the doorknob was a tie, and we waited for about 5 minutes and then the tie fluttered back and forth for a second. The guys were stunned because there was no passage of air anywhere within the basement, let alone the laundry room, and I, however, thought that it was pretty much nothing and certainly not enough to convince me. So I ended up asking for another sign. Again, I know, stupid. When I asked though, the spirit obliged. I again asked what I needed to pay attention to, and he told me to listen. We sat there for about another 5 to 10 minutes with pretty much nothing happening. And then, all of a sudden, we hear one loud ring of a singular xylophone key play out. We walk out of the laundry room and we find both the xylophone mallets are wedged in between the xylophone keys, just standing straight up. Nothing happened after this since the guys wouldn't play anymore, and honestly, I never got it to work in my house, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. So, I don't know how to begin this, but I decided to share this to get some help because I'm just afraid to ask anyone I know personally. I'm 24 years old, a roughneck working up in the northern Minnesota logging area, among other work too. Recently, or yesterday in fact, due to our bow hunting season opening, I've been spending my time out in the woods. I live on a fairly large plot of land near Eli, Minnesota. There are a few towns over the population of 2,500 this far north, and neighbours are far and few in between. The terrain is really unforgiving compared to the rest of Minnesota too, and this ties into my story. So, here's what happened. I began by climbing into my non-permanent stand about 2.5 to 3 miles from my house in the state forest adjacent to my property. It was opening morning and all was on par. The sun was barely creeping out when I looked off into the woodlands and spotted something really odd. It was a white-tailed deer, perhaps 40 yards away too. The woods up there are so thick that I could only see the body and the neck, and that's what really confused me the most. It was sickly grey, with pieces of dried matted fur clinging to its bony physique. It looked like a piece of roadkill just standing there. I pulled on my backpack that was hanging off to my left for binoculars to get a closer look, and at this time, I had the urge to look back. For some reason, I felt the back of my head vibrate, like little vibrations or something. I felt a cold sweat work its way across my body, and I looked back and I saw the deer now turn towards me. It was taller than a usual deer too, but physically looked inept, if that makes sense. Now, I also saw its head and antlers too, and worst of all though, was its eyes. Its eyes, even from the distance that I could see, were just milky white, completely off hue from the usual brown or black of deer. Its head was really disproportionate too, favouring its left side with a bulging jaw. The antlers were just really unusual too. Instead of the fresh new transition from velvet to antler, it was a muddy green with an almost pus-coloured flavour to it. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came over me too. I mean, I've been through things that I can't explain. I've seen people that I care about die mere meters away from me. But this is the sole time that I felt truly afraid. I was making eye contact for maybe a minute maximum, blinked, and then this thing was just gone, as if I almost imagined it or something. I still had the overwhelming urge to run too, which eventually I did, and I noticed as soon as I made it down with all my gear that the usual sounds of the forest, they just weren't there. There were no birds, no squeaking of squirrels,